the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one demanding the spotlight. No, it's the one sitting quietly in the corner, weaponizing their own perceived fragility to control absolutely everyone else.
Yeah, it's a terrifying dynamic.
Right? Welcome to The Debate. When we talk about covert narcissism, the destruction is, well, it's entirely silent.
Completely invisible to outsiders.
Exactly. But the clinical literature leaves us with this massive divide on how to properly analyze this hidden world. So the central question we are exploring today is this. When we analyze the subtle, dark psychology of covert narcissists, should our primary focus be on the predator's calculated extraction of power, which they mask with vulnerability? Or should we focus on the profound physiological and psychological dismantling of the victim's reality? Right. And I argue that covert narcissism is fundamentally an offensive, calculated strategy. It's a predatory mechanism of masking grandiosity through pity and passive aggression to gain omnipotent control.
And I argue that if we focus primarily on that predator's calculus, we completely miss the core of the pathology. I mean, this dynamic is best understood through the systematic destruction of the victim's reality, their nervous system, and their identity.
So let's establish exactly how this predatory calculus operates, because frankly, it flies in the face of what most people expect.
Right, the whole cultural stereotype.
Yeah, when we think of a narcissist, the stereotype points to the loud, boastful individual dominating the boardroom, demanding attention, bragging. But the covert presentation, often referred to in the literature as vulnerable narcissism, operates as a deeply offensive strategy that is just, well, it's much harder to spot.
Oh, absolutely.
The source material is very clear on one crucial point here. These individuals share the exact same core of grandiosity, the exact same entitlement, and the exact same lack of empathy as overt narcissists. The difference is entirely in the camouflage.
They just hide it better.
They possess the chilling cognitive ability to mask that arrogance under a shy, introverted, or even, a chronically depressed persona. So what looks to the outside world like chronic victimhood and martyrdom is not a sign of genuine emotional struggle. It is a highly calculated mechanism to extract what the clinical literature calls narcissistic supply.
I mean, I see where you're going, but
By playing the ultimate victim, they secure omnipotent control over their environment and their partner, completely bypassing the defenses that people naturally put up against over-arrogance. Because think about it. How can you hold someone accountable when they are so incredibly fragile, so misunderstood, and so perpetually wronged by the world? It is a masterclass in covert dominance.
Wait, I look at this from a completely different angle.
Go ahead.
Focusing almost exclusively on that strategic maneuvering, the masked grandiosity, it minimizes the true horror of this dynamic, which is the invisible, catastrophic emotional toll it takes on the target.
I'm not minimizing the toll, but
Well, if you look at the clinical data and the literature on relational trauma, the defining characteristic of covert narcissism isn't the abuser's strategy at all. It is the trauma bond. It is the phenomenon of death by 1,000 cuts. The abuser's internal reality might be a fragile defense mechanism, yes, but the victim's reality is completely eroded through constant, agonizing hypervigilance.
I hear the physiological toll you are describing.
They are perpetually walking on eggshells, trying to navigate a minefield where the rules just change daily. This isn't just an intellectual game of control, right? This dynamic literally replaces the victim's individual identity with profound self-doubt, toxic shame, and ultimately complex PTSD. The true measure of this pathology is found in the physiological wreckage left behind.
But we have to look at how that reality is eroded in the first place. It doesn't just happen by accident.
No, of course not.
It is eroded because the covert narcissist intentionally weaponizes pity. We need to view this as an active, aggressive tool. Let's look at the specific phrasing they use in the source text. Phrases like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me."
Yes, the guilt trips.
Or, "I guess I'm just not important to you. I'll just sit here alone." That is not depression. That is weaponized guilt. It's a Trojan horse.
right, but calling it a Trojan horse,
Let me just finish this thought. They are using the socially acceptable shell of, I'm hurt, to bypass the victim's boundaries and establish absolute dominance. They present an image of vulnerability that demands caretaking, but the moment the partner attempts to set a boundary or address a legitimate issue, the covert narcissist immediately flips the script.
They always do.
They redirect the conversation entirely toward their own suffering, effectively making the partner the villain for having any needs at all. This is an incredible exertion of omnipotent control because they're literally dictating the thoughts and feelings assigned to the partner.
Okay, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Calling it a Trojan horse is accurate. But you are looking at the wooden horse while I am looking at the city burning from the inside.
Well, they're both part of the attack.
Sure, but this use of pity is exactly what trips victims up. And if you are listening to this right now and wondering why you are always so exhausted around a specific person, this is why. The victim genuinely believes they are helping a sensitive, wounded partner. Usually, targets of covert narcissists are highly empathetic people.
They have a high tolerance for caretaking.
They have a massive capacity for care. And that empathy is systematically exploited. They are covertly gaslit into taking full responsibility for the abuser's mood. Let's talk about the biological mechanism here, the fawn response.
Okay.
When the narcissist sighs heavily, or gives the silent treatment, or says, I'll just manage somehow, the victim's nervous system registers that subtle cue as a life or death emergency.
A life or death emergency? Isn't that a bit extreme?
Physiologically, no. The body goes into a trauma response known as fawning, which is essentially a survival instinct where you appease, accommodate, and anticipate what the threat needs to pacify it. The physiological stress of doing that every single day is enormous. We are talking about chronic cortisol spikes.
Right.
We are talking about unexplained nausea, severe insomnia, autoimmune flare-ups. The victim is literally being made sick by their environment, forced to constantly monitor micro-expressions just to survive a Tuesday evening in their own living room.
Let's follow that logic, though. The physical exhaustion you are describing is the exact intended result of the narcissist's probing. Let's examine the devaluation phase because it perfectly illustrates the calculus I am talking about.
You think they plan the exhaustion?
Absolutely. The covert narcissist uses micro-insults and the silent treatment to constantly test the waters. They will drop a backhanded compliment, something incredibly subtle, like, you're pretty smart for someone who didn't go to college. Or, you look great today, much better than usual.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the subtle digs.
Right. These are not accidental slips of the tongue or signs of social awkwardness. This is narcissistic probing. They are deliberately withdrawing affection and utilizing these subtle jabs to punish any independence the partner shows and to test their absolute compliance.
But treating it as a meticulously calibrated test makes it sound like a sterile chess match.
It is a calculated way of chipping away at the partner's self-esteem to ensure they remain subordinate. If the partner reacts with anger or tries to hold them accountable, the narcissist immediately retreats into hypersensitivity. They claim they were just joking or that the partner is being too sensitive. It is a meticulously calibrated test of power. They push, they observe the reaction, and they adjust their mask accordingly.
It is not just a tactical assessment, though. It is psychological torture that chemically alters the victim's brain. Let's actually unpack the neuroscience of the trauma bond that the material outlines, because we have to explain why highly intelligent, capable people don't just walk away from these micro-insults.
Because they get hooked.
Yes, it starts with intermittent reinforcement. In the beginning of the relationship, there is intense love bombing. The covert narcissist floods the victim's brain with dopamine and oxytocin. They mirror the victim's hopes, they listen intensely. The victim feels seen, valued, and incredibly safe. Then, suddenly,
The mask slips.
the narcissist withdraws that warmth. They go cold for no discernible reason. That sudden shift from idealization to devaluation creates a slot machine effect in the brain.
The payout principle.
Gambler is addicted to the possibility of a payout. They are desperately trying to figure out what they did wrong to cause this sudden freeze. They are trapped in a cycle of profound cognitive confusion and physiological addiction.
Operating on false hope.
Operating on the false hope that if they just try harder, if they just communicate better, the loving partner they met will come back. They aren't failing a compliance test. They are caught in a biological addiction to a person who is starving them of emotional oxygen.
I hear that, but doesn't that line of reasoning inadvertently strip the narcissist of their agency in architecting that exact addiction?
How does it strip their agency?
Because the intermittent reinforcement doesn't just happen randomly. It is the outward manifestation of the narcissist's internal splitting. We need to explain how the narcissist's brain actually processes reality. They lack what psychologists call object constancy.
Okay, yes, the lack of object constancy is key.
Right? If a healthy person is angry at their partner, they can still simultaneously remember that they love them and that their partner is fundamentally a good person. The narcissist cannot do this. In their mind, they have an idealized, perfect snapshot of the partner. When the real human partner inevitably deviates from that perfect snapshot,
by having their own needs.
yes, by having their own needs, expressing an opposing opinion, or even just succeeding independently, the narcissist experiences this as a direct threat to their own grandiosity. So they split. In that moment, the partner goes from being all good to entirely, maliciously all bad.
And then the devaluation starts.
To manage this threat, they devalue the partner. They use triangulation, dropping hints about other people to foster jealousy. They use selective memory, flat out denying that conversations ever happened to make the partner question their own sanity. The entire machinery of devaluation is designed to protect the narcissist's incredibly fragile ego by exporting all of their own internal shame onto the partner.
That is a fascinating breakdown of their internal architecture, but
To maintain a steady flow of narcissistic supply without ever having to offer genuine intimacy in return.
Okay, but have you considered that focusing so heavily on the narcissist's internal splitting often serves to intellectualize what is fundamentally systemic abuse?
I'm not intellectualizing it, I'm analyzing the mechanism.
But when we prioritize the abuser's psychological mechanisms, we risk minimizing the lived reality of the target. The victim in the living room isn't analyzing the narcissist's lack of object constancy. They are genuinely wondering if they are losing their mind.
Well, yes, the gaslighting is severe.
When the covert narcissist uses gaslighting, looking them dead in the eye and saying, "That never happened," or "You're acting crazy," they aren't just protecting an ego, they are systematically dismantling the victim's epistemic security.
Their trust in their own reality.
Exactly. Epistemic security is your fundamental trust in your own ability to perceive reality. It is your belief that what you see, hear, and remember is real. The narcissist chips away at that until the victim completely loses their sense of self. They forget who they were before the relationship.
They start mirroring the abuser to survive.
They start mirroring the abuser's opinions just to keep the peace and avoid triggering another silent treatment. The loss of identity becomes so complete that the victim actually internalizes the abuse. They start doing the narcissist's job for them, telling themselves they're just under a lot of stress at work or they love me deep down. That profound psychological wreckage, the total collapse of a person's trust in their own mind, is the true phenomenon here, not the fragile ego of the person holding the hammer.
But to stop the hammer, we absolutely must understand the hand swinging it. And this becomes undeniable when we reach the end game of the relationship, the discard.
Oh, the discard is devastating.
This is where the covert narcissist's dark psychology is most evident and most dangerous. Let's break down the DARVO tactic they use to engineer the end of the relationship. DARVO stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Right.
As we established, the narcissist literally cannot tolerate shame. Their psychological survival depends entirely on remaining the all-good ultimate victim. So when the relationship is no longer serving them, they engineer the discard by projecting their own malice onto the partner. They push the partner's boundaries relentlessly.
the crazy-making behavior.
They provoke them through passive aggression and subtle undermining, until the partner is pushed to the absolute brink and finally snaps or raises their voice. And the very second the partner reacts with normal human frustration, the narcissist points to that reaction as proof of the partner's instability. Look at how aggressive you are. Look at how you're yelling at me. I'm terrified of you.
It's so predictable.
They split the partner into an all-bad persecutory object. This allows the narcissist to walk away, claiming they were driven to it.
It secures them immediate sympathy from third parties, friends, family, who act as flying monkeys, validating the narcissist's victimhood. It is a brilliant, entirely malevolent calculus to extract themselves without ever taking an ounce of accountability.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's a clean discard. Let me tell you why.
Okay, tell me.
I have to push back on the idea that this is just a neat little psychological trick of splitting to orchestrate an exit. You are describing the discard as a proactive strategy initiated by the narcissist's internal timeline, but the clinical reality shows us something entirely different about the timing.
What about the timing?
The covert discard almost never happens when the victim is broken and compliant. It is almost always triggered exactly when the victim starts to regain their footing.
When they set a boundary.
Yes, it happens when the victim finally sets a healthy boundary, or starts going to therapy, or secures a new job and experiences a moment of independent success. The discard is triggered because the victim is no longer a viable, limitless source of supply. They are no longer willing to be the emotional punching bag.
Which supports my point about supply.
But the devastation of this specific timing cannot be overstated. The victim is finally standing up, finally grasping onto reality and trusting their own mind again, and the narcissist abruptly severs the connection with complete, cold, executive indifference. It is the ultimate betrayal. It is precisely because of this profound danger and the absolute lack of closure that trauma therapists introduced the Gray Rock method from the source text.
Let's examine the mechanics of the Gray Rock method, because to me it perfectly illustrates my central argument about the predatory need for supply. Look at why Gray Rock actually works. What is the mechanism?
The mechanism is survival. It works because victims must protect their sanity in an inherently insane environment. To go gray rock means you make yourself as completely uninteresting and emotionless as a gray rock on the ground.
Right.
You keep your responses brief, factual, and neutral. If they insult you, you say, okay. If they try to provoke a defense, you say, I see your point. No warmth, no anger, no tears, no defending your character.
Exactly. You starve them of supply.
By doing this, the victim starves the narcissist of the emotional reactions they desperately need. The abuser thrives on the victim's distress. That is their validation that they exist and have power. When the victim cuts off that fuel, the provocations lose their purpose. It is a necessary tactical retreat to lower the emotional discomfort and protect the victim's nervous system while they plan their exit.
Which proves that the entire dynamic is from start to finish, driven by the predator's calculus. The narcissist operates entirely like a parasite that needs a host's emotional immune system to be compromised. They don't actually want a reciprocal relationship. They want a mirror that reflects their own omnipotence. When you go gray rock, you are simply turning the mirror to the wall.
But look at the cost of turning that mirror.
The effectiveness of gray rock demonstrates that covert narcissism is a functional, offensive strategy. It only persists as long as the extraction of emotional resources is successful. The moment the calculus fails, because the victim no longer provides the expected return on investment, no longer produces the dopamine hit of a tearful apology or an angry outburst, the narcissist is forced to abandon the strategy. This is exactly why I maintain that the dark psychology of the covert narcissist lies in their calculated ability to camouflage their grandiosity. You have to understand the parasite to starve it.
But look at the cost of starving it. Stripping them of their power using gray rock requires the victim to endure a complete suppression of their own humanity. Think about what that actually demands of a person on a daily basis.
It's difficult, sure.
It's not just difficult. You are asking someone to suppress their natural empathy, to swallow their righteous anger, to flatten their personality, their joy, and their spontaneous reactions entirely, just to avoid being psychologically attacked in their own home. It requires an immense, draining amount of cognitive effort to sit there and not react when someone is deliberately twisting your reality.
It's a temporary tactic.
Yes. And while it might be a highly effective temporary tactic to stop the bleeding, the chronic suppression required to maintain a gray rock persona takes its own severe physiological toll over time. You are essentially playing dead to survive. That is why I fundamentally maintain that the true measure of covert narcissism isn't found in analyzing the abuser's psychological architecture.
Where is it found, then?
It is found in the psychological wreckage left behind, the deep trauma bonds, the eroded self-esteem, the lost years, and the hyper-vigilant nervous systems of victims who were slowly, methodically taught to doubt their own sanity. The pathology should not be defined by the complex mask the abuser wears, but by the permanent scars they leave on the people who simply tried to love them.
I will say both of our perspectives highlight a deeply destructive dynamic that is infinitely harder to spot than the overt stereotype of a chest-beating narcissist. And I absolutely acknowledge the strength in your view. Understanding the physiological reality of the trauma bond and the brain chemistry behind intermittent reinforcement is essential.
Right. Logic doesn't override biology.
Exactly. It is the only way to explain why highly intelligent, capable, successful people find themselves trapped in these dynamics, completely unable to just walk away when logic tells them they should. The camouflage of vulnerability and weaponized pity is what makes the trap so incredibly effective to begin with, but you are right that the biological trauma bond is what keeps the jaws of the trap clamped shut. We clearly continue to disagree on whether the primary analytical lens should be the predator's hidden calculus or the victim's lived trauma, but there is simply no denying the absolute devastation this personality style causes.
No, I agree completely with that. And I think recognizing the strategic nature of the manipulation, understanding the mechanics of Darvo, the purpose behind the narcissistic probing, and the intentionality of the gaslighting is incredibly important.
It demystifies the chaotic behavior.
It really does. That understanding is what eventually allows the victim to realize that the abuse is not their fault. But the long-term recovery has to focus on the nervous system. There is far more to explore in the clinical source material regarding how we heal from this. Topics like boundary setting, somatic experiencing to regulate a traumatized nervous system, and deep psychological recovery. Because it is a long, complex journey from intellectually realizing you are being manipulated to actually untangling the biological addiction of the trauma bond.
There is immense value in looking at these toxic dynamics from multiple perspectives, examining both the machinery of the abuse and the reality of the fallout. We hope this deep dive leaves you equipped to recognize these silent red flags in your own lives and to trust your intuition when someone's words of vulnerability just don't match the anxiety in your body.
So true.
Because ultimately, the most dangerous person in the room really isn't the one demanding the spotlight. It's the one sitting quietly in the corner, weaponizing their own perceived fragility to control everyone else. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.